You've been told that the euro was born from the ashes of war, that it was a noble project designed to bind a fractured continent together to ensure that the horrors of the 20th century would never be repeated, a symbol of peace, unity, and shared prosperity. It's a beautiful story. It's a powerful story. And for the most part, it is a carefully packaged illusion. The darkest truths are always hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the prettiest lies. The creation of the euro wasn't primarily about peace, it was about power. It wasn't about creating a family of equals. It was about locking an entire continent into a new kind of empire, one run not by generals and armies, but by bankers and bureaucrats. This isn't just some abstract history lesson. The financial architecture built in secret meetings 2 decades ago dictates the value of the money in your pocket today. It fuels the political anger you see on the news every night. It is a quiet, invisible force that has hollowed out the middle class of an entire continent and has set the stage for the next great financial crisis. The story of the euro is the story of a modern Trojan horse, wheeled through the gates of sovereign nations under the banner of friendship, only for its doors to swing open in the dead of night, revealing a system of permanent control. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what happens when the next one is wheeled up to your door? To understand the trap, you have to understand the blueprint. You have to go back to the single most pivotal moment in late 20th century Europe, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. For 40 years, Germany had been a divided, neutered nation. Suddenly, it was on the verge of reunification. A new, 80 million strong economic juggernaut was about to be born in the heart of Europe, and this terrified one country more than any other, France. The French president at the time, François Mitterrand, saw the writing on the wall. A unified Germany, armed with its titanically powerful currency, the Deutschmark, would completely dominate the continent. France would be reduced to a junior partner. The playbook is ancient. When your rival is about to gain a massive strategic advantage, you have 2 choices: go to war or find another way to put a leash on them. The president, as a cunning and deeply cynical political operator, chose the latter. He and the French elite devised a plan of breathtaking ambition. They would give German Chancellor Helmut Kohl their blessing for reunification, but at a staggering price. Germany would have to give up its greatest weapon. It would have to kill the Deutschmark. This was the grand bargain, the secret pact at the heart of the euro. Germany would be politically whole again, but it would have to sacrifice its monetary sovereignty on the altar of European integration. It would be shackled to its neighbors, its economic power diluted in a shared currency. In their minds, the French had caged the beast. But here is where the story takes a darker turn. The Germans, led by their powerful central bank, the Bundesbank, were masters of the financial game. They agreed to the deal, but they insisted on designing the cage themselves. They laid down a set of rigid, non-negotiable rules. The new European Central Bank would be a carbon copy of their own Bundesbank, located in Frankfurt and obsessed with one thing and one thing only: fighting inflation. It would be completely independent of political control. Crucially, they embedded a poison pill into the very heart of the system, a deliberate, catastrophic design flaw. They created a monetary union, one currency, one central bank, one interest rate for everyone, but they explicitly forbade a fiscal union. What does that mean? It means there would be no shared treasury, no pooling of taxes, no Eurobonds to share debt across the continent, no mechanism to transfer wealth from the rich, productive parts of the union to the poorer, struggling parts. It's like putting 19 different families in a single house, forcing them all to use one credit card managed by the most austere, tight-fisted German patriarch and forbidding any family member from helping another who gets into financial trouble. It wasn't an oversight. It was the entire point. It was a system designed to force the German model of fiscal discipline onto the entire continent, without Germany ever having to pay for the other country's problems. The Germans didn't just walk into a cage. They convinced everyone else to lock themselves inside it with them, while secretly holding the only key. For the first decade, it felt like a miracle. The Trojan horse was parked in the city square, and everyone was celebrating. With the launch of the euro in 1999, something magical happened. Countries like Greece, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland, which historically had weak currencies and had to pay high interest rates to borrow money, were suddenly able to borrow at the same rock-bottom rates as Germany. The markets looked at a Greek government bond and a German government bond and, foolishly, saw them as the same risk. The effect was like a potent drug. Cheap credit flooded the system. Do you see the pattern here? It never changes. From the roaring 20s to the dot-com bubble to the 2008 housing crisis, every financial mania in history starts with the same ingredient: a tsunami of cheap, easy money. In Spain and Ireland, it fueled a housing bubble of biblical proportions. Everyone became a property developer. In Greece, the government used the cheap loans to go on a massive spending spree, hiring legions of public sector workers and promising generous pensions they could never afford. It was a debt-fueled party. The illusion of wealth was everywhere. But it wasn't real wealth, it was a borrowed prosperity. They were building their houses on a foundation of sand, denominated in a currency they could not print and did not control. The core economies, especially Germany, were happy to play along. Their big banks, like Deutsche Bank and Société Générale, were the ones lending all this money to the periphery, making obscene profits. And Germany's own export-driven economy was turbocharged by the euro. If Germany still had the Deutschmark, its value would have soared, making German cars and machinery too expensive for the rest of the world. The euro acted as an artificially weak currency for Germany, effectively subsidizing its entire industrial base. It was the greatest economic stimulus program in German history, paid for by the ballooning debts of its neighbors. A quiet, brutal transfer of wealth was already underway. The party was great, but the hangover was going to be hell. And then, in 2008, the music stopped. The global financial crisis, which started with subprime mortgages in America, ripped across the Atlantic and exposed the European project for the hollow structure it truly was. The tide went out, and it turned out that half of Europe had been swimming naked. Greece was the first to fall. Its government admitted it had been lying about its deficit for years. Suddenly, the bond markets woke up from their slumber. The lenders, the very same French and German banks that had showered Greece with cheap money, panicked. They refused to lend anymore, and the interest rates on Greek debt skyrocketed. This is the moment the trap springs shut. In the old days, before the euro, Greece would have had a simple, painful but effective way out. It would have defaulted on some of its debt, and it would have devalued its currency, the drachma. This would have made Greek exports and tourism cheap and competitive again, allowing the economy to slowly recover. But Greece no longer had the drachma. It was locked in the financial straitjacket of the euro. It could not devalue. It could not print its own money to pay its bills. It was helpless. It had all the debt of a sovereign nation, but the monetary tools of a local municipality like Ohio. And here is where the story gets darker. The doors of the Trojan horse finally swung open. Greece was forced to go, cap in hand, to the powers in Brussels and Frankfurt for a bailout. A group of unelected technocrats, the infamous Troika, the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the International Monetary Fund, would now dictate the fate of a sovereign nation. And what they offered wasn't a rescue. It was a punishment. It was a masterclass in the weaponization of debt. The so-called bailouts were not for the Greek people. The vast majority of the money went straight from the bailout funds, passed through a Greek government bank account for a few hours, and then flowed directly back to the creditor banks in Germany and France. It was a bailout for the reckless lenders, with the bill handed to the Greek taxpayer. In exchange for this help, the Troika demanded a policy of savage, brutal austerity. They forced the Greek government to fire hundreds of thousands of public workers, slash pensions by 40%, gut its healthcare system, and sell off its national assets, ports, airports, utilities, to foreign corporations at bargain bin prices. It was a financial colonization. Youth unemployment soared past 50%. The economy was deliberately driven into a depression worse than America's Great Depression of the 1930s. The democratic will of the Greek people was rendered meaningless. When they voted in a referendum to reject the bailout terms, the EU simply ignored them, forcing their government to capitulate. Sovereignty was an illusion. The real power lay with the creditors. The playbook never changes. He who has the gold, or in this case, the ability to create the currency, makes the rules. What happened to Greece was not an isolated incident. It was a message to the rest of the European periphery, Italy, Spain, Portugal. The message was clear: there is no escape. The system has been designed to create a permanent two-tier Europe. At the top, You have the creditor core, led by Germany. They benefit from a currency that is too weak for their hyper-productive economy, fueling massive trade surpluses. They accumulate all the capital. They are the house in the casino. And then you have the debtor periphery. They are trapped in a currency that is too strong for their less productive economies. It makes their labor uncompetitive. It makes their exports expensive. They are caught in a doom loop of low growth, high unemployment, and unsustainable debt. To compete, their only option is something called internal devaluation, which is just a fancy economic term for crushing the wages and living standards of their own population. They are forced to get poorer just to stay in the game. This isn't a new idea. This is how empires have always worked. The Roman Empire exploited its provinces for grain and taxes to feed the poor in Rome. The British Empire extracted raw materials from its colonies to fuel its factories back home. The modern Eurozone does it more elegantly, more quietly, with spreadsheets and sovereign bond yields instead of ships and soldiers. But the dynamic is identical. It is a system for extracting economic energy from the periphery to the core. The irony was brutal. A project that sold itself on the promise of shared prosperity had created the greatest engine of inequality in modern European history. So why does any of this matter to you, right now, wherever you are in the world? Because the ticking time bomb built into the heart of Europe never went away. It was just silenced. The European Central Bank, led by Mario Draghi and later Christine Lagarde, managed to stop the crisis from spiraling out of control by doing the one thing the Germans swore they would never allow. They started printing money, trillions and trillions of euros, created out of thin air under the guise of quantitative easing. They used this new money to buy up the government bonds of failing countries like Italy and Spain, artificially holding down their interest rates and keeping the illusion of solvency alive. But they haven't fixed the underlying problem. They've just papered over it with an ocean of fake money. The fundamental imbalances, Germany's massive surpluses and the periphery's massive debts, are worse than ever. Italy's public debt is now a gargantuan, terrifying mountain that can never be repaid. It's a zombie economy, kept alive only by the life support of 0% interest rates and endless money printing from the ECB. This affects you directly. First, this relentless money printing is a slow-motion theft of your own wealth. The cash you hold, the savings in your bank account, is a melting ice cube. Every new euro, dollar, or pound created by a central bank to bail out a broken system devalues the currency you work and save in. Second, the European financial system is so large and interconnected with the rest of the globe that its inevitable next crisis will not be contained. When the Italian debt bomb finally detonates, it will trigger a financial contagion that will make 2008 look like a minor tremor. Your pension, your investments, your job, they are all exposed to this structural fragility. And perhaps most importantly, the political fallout from this economic trap is reshaping our world. The years of Troika-imposed austerity and the loss of democratic sovereignty created a wave of bitterness and rage that has fueled the rise of populist, nationalist, and anti-EU movements across the continent. Brexit was not an accident. The political turmoil in Italy, the rise of the far right in France and Germany, these are the direct political consequences of an economic system that strips people of their agency and their hope. The project that was supposed to guarantee peace is instead creating the very political divisions and resentments that have historically led to conflict. So what is the lesson here? The uncomfortable truth is that the euro is a fundamentally political project disguised as an economic one. It is a system of control designed to subordinate national democracies to a centralized, technocratic financial power. It proves, once again, that money is never just money. Currency is power. And a shared currency without a shared political and fiscal system is a trap. The goal of this channel has always been to help you see the patterns, to understand the playbook, because the same principles apply everywhere. The story of the euro is the story of elites creating a system that benefits them, sold to the public with a comforting narrative, which then fails catastrophically, forcing the public to pay the price while the architects of the failure walk away unscathed. You cannot change this system alone. But you don't have to be its victim. Empowerment begins with understanding. It begins with rejecting the official narratives and learning to see the world as it is, a complex and often brutal, contest for power and resources. Understand how debt is used as a tool of control. Understand how money printing devalues your labor. Understand that your financial survival depends not on trusting the experts and institutions, but on learning the rules of the game they created. Don't be a pawn. History doesn't have to repeat, but if you don't understand the playbook, it will crush you all the same. Learn the rules. Protect yourself.